Okay, I think we can kick things off. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss some of the major disruptions to business as usual that have impacted our industry this year. So before we get started, I just briefly want to introduce GroundTruth for any new faces in the room. First, I'm Rosie O'Meara. I am Chief Revenue Officer here at GroundTruth. GroundTruth is the leading location-based marketing and ad tech company, and we're committed to leveraging real-world data to better power our clients' campaigns and ultimately help them reach their performance goals. Over the years, in my experience in different roles in the industry and ad tech, I've worked with agencies, brands, small businesses, publishers, data providers, and everything in between. And what I know for sure is that everyone has a goal or goals that they're trying to achieve. And the second thing that we all have in common is at some point, we will all be forced to accept and navigate changing circumstances, which are often not in our control. So today's topics are broadly applicable, but I think more importantly, we know that by working together and sharing insights and strategies, we're building a more resilient industry that can really take on anything that the future has in store for us. So during today's session, we will hear from WeatherBug's SVP of Revenue, Mike Brooks, and he's going to walk us through the impact, importance, and key things to understand about the upcoming rollout of iOS 14. Next, we will hear from full-service digital advertising company Vici Media's founding partner, Megan Malone, in a fireside chat with GroundTruth's VP of Platform Sales, Eric Carlson. And they will dive into the winning strategies that helped Vici Media's clients adjust to the changing consumer landscape during this year's pandemic. So along the way, if you have questions while the speakers are on the stage, feel free to ask them via the Q&A function, and we'll try to get through as many as we can following each session. We'll also allot a few minutes at the end and open up the digital floor for general questions about the topics discussed. So please engage and we'll answer along the way. So to kick things off, I will hand it over to Mike Brooks to walk us through impact and importance of the iOS update and what that really means for businesses in 2021.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosie. Is my video coming through, friends?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us. Rosie, that was an awesome intro, and indeed some heavy changes afoot with what we're doing right now in mobile. So really happy to be here today to talk to everybody. You know, I think we've been talking about iOS 14 for a while, some really fundamental changes happening to the structure in mobile. And, you know, this is a 2-hour technical PhD course that we're going to talk about for about 10 minutes here. So if I forget a couple small details or things, please ask questions and we'll get to things as we can. So what we're going to talk about today, what I'm going to talk about today for the next 15 minutes is one, my perspective and kind of where we're coming from a WeatherBug perspective, why we think the way that we think, what's important to us, and why mobile is kind of a driving force for what we do. Secondly, talk a little bit about the news. What did come along with iOS 14? What are the tactical changes that are happening in mobile? Three, I want to talk a little bit about what does that mean, both specifically for the industry and then individually for a couple verticals that I think we have represented here today. And then finally, talk about where we go from here as partners. So really excited to be here. Thank you so much to the GroundTruth crew for having me. As you guys may or may not know, but you probably do, WeatherBug is part of the GroundTruth family. So we get to work with these folks and work on these innovations day in, day out. And we'll talk about some of those today. So without further ado, I will jump into a little bit about where we're coming from an iOS 14 perspective. Thank you, Evelyn. So WeatherBug, to begin with, is a media brand that's celebrating its 20th birthday this year. We are reaching 14 million monthly active users. It's important to note the vast majority of that is in mobile app. So it's really important for us to know, to have a good understanding of what's happening here in mobile. So I would say what happens in iOS and Apple and the changes they make have a very direct impact with how WeatherBug does business. Other things to know about the business: we're small, we're under 40 people, we're 20 years old, but we're still growing. So a lot of really cool things coming out of what we're doing. The way we make money is advertising related today. So we are a mobile app publisher and we show advertising to generate revenue. That's important because a lot of the context we'll talk about today is in the advertising space. And I figured that's why you guys are here. So that's what we'll talk about. Within my role at WeatherBug as SVP of revenue, I cover direct sales, programmatic partnerships, business development, anything money related outside of P&T, product and technology, for our organization. The other piece of that comes into play here is user acquisition. So I partner with Sarah Main, our head of product, on marketing, but the ability to go out and find mobile app users is going to be impacted by some of the changes we talk about here today. So I'll add a little bit of the mobile app flair, but with some context as we move on. So that's me. That's my role within the WeatherBug org. And then from here, we'll talk a little bit about what the news was, how we're looking at it, and some of the things we think our friends and partners should be thinking about. Next slide, please, Evelyn. Awesome. So 2 major changes coming out of iOS 14. And iOS 14 is the operating system for Apple phones. It was announced June 22nd of this year. It went into play on September 16th. So some of the things we talk about today are already in effect. And then the big chunk of what we're going to talk about today, the second piece, this app tracking and transparency framework, that has been delayed until early next year. So we'll talk about some of the specificity or lack thereof in what we're getting, but note that this stuff is changing every day. Literally on the Apple website, they're changing policy and editing the text day in, day out, and we have to go in and see what's changing. So note that this is a constantly evolving story, and what we have now is the most recent report of the news. So let's hop into the first piece, which I think should be discussed here, but I think is not as big of a deal in the long term as the second piece. And this is the advent of approximate location. The idea around approximate location has been around before, but it's the idea instead of sending a specific GPS lat long, that's obfuscated a little bit to a larger area. This is a privacy focused release, which we love. The idea here is this is opt out. So if you want to opt out of precision tracking, you will click, as you see here, this prompt, and you'll have in the corner this toggle. So this toggle that says precise on or off, people will have the ability to toggle that off. A lot of apps, including WeatherBug, still have a really good reason to be asking for precise location, and users need it to perform the function. So, we haven't seen that big of an impact to scale, both on the WeatherBug side and on the GroundTruth side. But it's worth mentioning that this idea of being able to toggle off precision location has been introduced to provide another lever for privacy. So that's all I'll spend on approximate location, but it is a new idea introduced with this release. Next slide, please, Evelyn. Thank you. So this is the real news. This new idea is called the App Tracking and Transparency Framework. So this all revolves around this prompt that you see on the screen and the rules around it. But this is what going after the ideas of IDFA, Apple's ID for advertisers, and tracking. So these are the 2 concepts that are going to be changed fundamentally by this release over the course of time. I think it's important to note this story is part of a greater story around what's happening with third-party cookieability and IDFA, and eventually Google Ad ID with privacy and universal identifiers, and we'll talk about some of that evolution. But note, this is one of the pieces of a larger story. So let's break down kind of what this actually means, and there's 2 pieces. There's the framework, and then there is the idea of tracking that they're really going after and what the IDFA does. So from a framework perspective, what Apple is saying is in this release is every single app for every single user that wants to track, they must use this framework and serve this prompt. They can only serve this prompt once per user. If the user says no, you cannot track them based on the definition of Apple, which is pretty broad, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this mechanic going after the framework of having to surface this request, this is a pretty foundational. We'll talk about some of the impacts that come along with it, but it really boils down to this prompt. And to break this prompt down a little bit, publishers don't get to control it. Publishers get to control this piece in the middle you see where it says your data will be used to deliver personalized ads to you. The Pal About or WeatherBug would like permission, etc., and then allow tracking ask not to track are out of our control. So because it is opt-in, the numbers and the changes will be different than the opt-out mechanic that was precise location. The other piece to mention here is the elegance of this that we talk about, because Apple is saying the way tracking is done has to change. So IDFA, which is this advertising identifier we use for a lot of tracking, we being the greater advertising ecosystem, is not necessarily what's changing. It's greater than that. It's this idea of tracking and what the rules are. So these are Apple's new rules of tracking that they're asking every iOS app to heed. Otherwise, as we say in the business, face the ban hammer. So we would very strongly prefer not to do that, and staying on the right side of this is very important for both WeatherBug and GroundTruth and its partners. So this will dictate a lot of what the future looks like. One thing to note is this tracking definition is referring to linking data from a user or device with data from another company. So the idea is first party, what you can look at in your own household becomes way more important when potentially things from other companies can be challenged. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those. The last piece I'll mention on what this means is if you are an app download advertiser or publisher, this is especially impactful because the ways app download tracking works has changed significantly. With this, and again, I don't want to go too far into it in case this is the wrong audience, the reinvention of this idea of SK Ad Network. SK Ad Network is the one thing you want to remember. That's Apple's internal system that they're using for app download. So again, that's the last piece I'll say on the news is the reinvention of SK Ad Network, but this idea of app tracking and transparency framework will change the way that tracking and companies work together in the mobile space. So that's kind of heavy. Let's talk about what happens next because of that news. Next slide, please, Evelyn. Thank you. So what happens next? This opt-in functionality where people have to click, yes, I do want to be tracked. We're expecting opt-in rates between 10 and 20%. I think the general industry number is somewhere around 15%, but we have a lot of work to do to reinforce to people why it's important that they would share that with us as a publisher to increase that number. But it is opt-in, so it's an uphill battle. We expect that to decrease the total number of IDFAs available out there. The question is, does it happen so much that it becomes less important, the IDFA as a whole? I tend to believe that is the case. And then one thing I'll add here to the so what happens next is I realize I didn't give this color in the beginning. What do people use this IDFA for? They use it for user targeting. They use it for attribution. I say they, we use it for attribution. We use it for marketing analytics. We use it for spend attribution. We use it for programmatic, and we use it for app downloads. So it's used as this way to recognize users in this universal language, so all of these companies can participate in this ecosystem. So what happens next is supply will go down, which will impact different parts of the industry in different ways. So let's hop into the next slide, please, and we'll talk about, hopefully some of these resonate with the folks in the room. Here are some of the important things that we should be thinking about from each of these subsections. So what do you do if you're a media agency? I think there's two big things to think about, one in the short term, one in the long term. We have until mid-March, which is when we expect the app tracking transparency framework to be enforced, to get into a position where everybody feels comfortable. One of the things people aren't thinking about is how is IDFA used in my internal analytics, especially if the iOS app is important to your business. So if your clients use an IDFA for any internal analytics, which is not unlikely, it's important to switch that to an owned and operated identifier. So every company can change from that third-party identifier to one they produce. That's one of the biggest infrastructural things we've done to change, to be ready for this change come next year. So advising clients on taking a hard look at how are we using it today in places we may not have been thinking, and analytics is a big one. The bigger executional one is about the future. You know, many user targeting tactics today rely on the IDFA. You know, so where you're reaching 90% of the US today, in 2 years, you could be reaching 70, 75%, 65%, depending on how the rest of the internet goes. So the idea is you have to make sure you're keeping the idea of reach in your mind. I think that lots of technologies, and we'll talk about some of that today, are going to erupt to help answer that question of how do you connect a brand with a consumer who is now in what we'd consider a non-addressable media source. So I think the long-term thought process for agencies might shift towards almost an addressable and a non-addressable component to each tactic, especially during this transitional time. So the other thing I would mention is contextual becomes so much more important. What's actually happening at the publisher level and how is that information getting into the hands of the buyer? The ability to unlock that is much greater now that it's been kind of said that third-party data has a cap. First-party data, though, you have been underusing your whole life, and you know, WeatherBug and every company I've talked to is in that boat. So for a media agency, explore evolving contextual opportunities, but think about the 2-year plan and how you focus and answer for what is now potentially an unaddressable part of your media plan. Secondly, what happens to pubs? So WeatherBug happens to be a publisher. You know, we make money from advertising. This came out in a big piece of news from Facebook, where Facebook expects the CPMs from Facebook Audience Network to decrease 50%. So the amount of money that a publisher makes from an ad could go down up to 50% without that targeted advertising. And I'll tell you what, we have access to limit ad tracking numbers as well, and that's not unreasonable, right? A 30 to 50% decrease in CPMs is likely to happen in the short term. What does that mean for the midterm and the long term? Kind of the corollary to what we talked about in the media agency world. We need to invest in infrastructure that focuses on getting our first-party data into the hands of buyers the way that they're used to buying. So again, all the pieces we talk about today fit into that core narrative. But you know, we're expecting a short-term hit, and then as technology evolves, continuing to even scale beyond where we are by using more contextual and first-party data directly connected with our clients. So that's what mobile app publishers are going to do. Let's talk about GroundTruth for a second. And I mentioned ad tech later here, but I'm gonna talk about GroundTruth collectively with advertising technology, because I think that the short term is okay, and the short term is kind of business as usual. It's the midterm and long-term opportunity that changes. One of the things that we anticipate happening is the world going less from advertising technology being about marketplaces to being more about facilitating directly that connection between brands and consumers. So at GroundTruth, it's something, you know, WeatherBug and GroundTruth have been thinking about and partnering on for a while, but that story of how do you fill the gap with first-party data, we kind of have a head start on what we're doing. So in general, advertising technology, I think, shifts from an exchange model into, you know, demand side and supply side partners that truly help bridge that connection where identity is a big piece. That's the future direction, I think, of the advertising technology space. And then, yeah, I think the focus on value and utility in the long term has to be what companies focus on. And, you know, I think you'll be really excited with some of the things you hear coming out of WeatherBug's continued partnership with GroundTruth on ways we're pioneering some of these challenges. And then I think the last piece is mobile app advertisers. Again, maybe a small subsection of folks here. If mobile app downloads are important to you, make sure you understand what's happening with SK Ad Network. Don't worry about it if you're not in the app download game, but SK Ad Network is the big system you really have to be comfortable with moving into the new world of iOS 14. So with that, where do we go from here? Sorry, I lumped ad tech in. Where do we go from here? I think it's two big questions that everybody should be asking. One is to their partners and one is to themselves. The first question is, what is my business's reliance today on the IDFA? How much is my marketing and targeting tactics reliant on it? How much are my analytics or attribution tools reliant on it? This is probably a function of how important the iOS app is to your business. But you really should take a look and say, how does this change? Because the supply of this could drastically change the efficacy of those systems come March. The second one, that's the internal. The external is, are we asking the right questions? So the first question is a question for a partner, and I would say, how does the changing identity landscape affect your current and future business plan? I think every smart partner should have a very detailed answer to that question, especially in the advertising partnership space. So that's one I would specifically ask is, what is your plan? And if they haven't thought about it, that should tell you something. The second thing I would say is an internal question of what data do I have on my consumers that I have been underutilizing for the past X however long. WeatherBug, GroundTruth, every company I know is sitting on a treasure trove of data in-house, but they've been focused on so many things externally that they haven't been able to take that deep look. I think strategically, every company here should take a deep look at what are their assets, especially when it comes to first party and data, and that will help you understand potentially how this impacts your strategy. So with that, I hope that was helpful in giving some background as to the changes that are happening in mobile. If there are questions, I saw a couple came through on the chat, happy to answer. Again, one other thing, my email is mbrooks@weatherbug.com. Please email me if there are any questions or anything you wanted to follow up here on, if you didn't want to ask in front of everybody else. So I'll hop into the Q&A of things I see in the chat. Eve or Evelyn, somebody jump in if I need to do this differently. But the first question we got from Stuart was, is precision on by default? Does it have to be opted out? The answer is yes. So when you're using an app today, you have already opted into precise location. Your ability is to click the button and to opt out. But everybody is opted in to start who has already said yes to location with other prompts. And I think if there's any other questions, feel free, again, ask them in the participant piece. If not, again, email me, email the crew. This is a constantly evolving thing. The news, it's exciting. It's going to be a really positive thing. It's good for privacy. And we're happy to be along with you guys for the ride. So with that, thank you very much for the time. I will hand over to Eric, who will run point on the next part of the conversation. Thanks so much for having me, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Mike. That was really informative and really appreciate that. That was fantastic. And we are very fortunate to have you on our team. My name is Eric Carlson, and I'm the Vice President of Platform Sales here at GroundTruth. And thrilled today to be joined by Megan Malone with Vici. Megan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan. Nice to meet you all.
Great. Well, Megan, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the opportunity to connect. Would love to just get started by learning a little bit more about Vici. Who is Vici and what is it that you do?
Yeah, Yeah, so we are a digital advertising agency, but we actually work with media groups and agencies, not direct to the client. So we provide white labeled solutions for all of our agencies and media clients. That could be traditional broadcast, radio, television, et cetera, across the country. And then we are their digital department. We do all their buying, reporting, optimization, consulting, and training. So for us, we're kind of technology agnostic, and we only work with the best of the best.
Great. Now, do you have specific verticals that you work within, or is it pretty wide span in terms of the types of clients you typically see?
Yeah, so through our partners, we run about 1,500 different campaigns a month, give or take. But historically, we specialize in a lot of brick and mortar, just like a lot of agencies and broadcast groups do. So we're big into automotive, into B2B, cannabis, colleges and universities is a big one for us, financial institutions, and then some of your like core digital clients like HVAC, law firms, political, and real estate. So we're across the board when it comes to the different specialties that we do. And then what we do is we break down industry specific techniques and training for each one of those verticals that we work with.
Wow. So yes, you do span quite a few verticals there.
Yeah.
So looking back to March, hate to do this, but looking back around the March timeframe, when COVID first started happening, what were some of the first changes or what were some of the first impacts that you were feeling or that you saw?
Yeah, I remember going on vacation March 26th and then returning and the world was on fire. I was in Mexico. It was really chaotic. Those first couple weeks, we took $1 million off the books within weeks. And that was shocking because we've never actually gone backwards like that before. We do a lot of events. We do a lot of restaurants. And so those were all closing. And there was kind of panic finding toilet paper. So people really weren't sure on what to do with the advertising side and what to do with their marketing budgets. It was super unprecedented for us. So, you know, and for everyone. And clients were just looking to us for advice. Our partners are looking for us, you know, just to show them what else is happening in other parts of the country. We weren't sure how bad it was going to get, like how much of a backslide advertising was going to face, how long it would last. Outside of like that first like $1 million off the books within a week, a majority of our campaigns actually paused. So it was a pretty scary time to say the least.
So what was some of the first things that you did then? Like, did your communication become different? I guess both, let's talk about both internally with the company and externally. I guess let's start with clients. Did your communication with clients become different somehow?
Yeah, so we do a lot of training to begin with, but we actually do in-market training. So we'll fly in with a local agency. So we typically specialize in like a small agency, let's say 1 person to 15 or 20 people. And then we go out with them on sales calls. So we're meeting with the automotive groups, with the law firms, and we're talking to them. So immediately, obviously, we had to stop all of our travel. And then what we decided to do is just really quickly shore up all of our communication. We went to weekly, sometimes bi-weekly category shift email blasts just to say, here's categories that are declining, here's categories that are going up, here's who you call on for the categories that are going up, because we actually did see some categories, you know, improve throughout COVID while others went down. We started shifting the tone of our weekly blogs to industry updates. So we did, here's what's going on with governmental spends, here's who you contact to get it, here's what's going on with cooperative advertising, here's where we're seeing on our end the budget shift, right? So as consumers were staying home, how did that budget actually shift to be able to reach people as they were inside of their house? And then one of the most important shifts that we did, which is really new for our company, was we created 10 to 15 different more consultative than salesy webinars. They're 30 to 45 minutes long. And typically, you know, whenever we're doing webinars, we're talking about, this is a great product, look at it, it's cutting edge, here's the tests that we've done. And we completely switched our tone to, here's what your business needs to do right now during the pandemic. This is how you update your Google My Business. This is what you should be tracking in your Google Analytics report. If you aren't advertising right now, what can you do for your SEO, and what should you do for looking at competitors and taking this time if you're off to do market research in a time that not a lot of people were doing it, because you're always just go, go, go.
Yeah, consultant for them, not just an execution
right.
arm, but you were really became more of a consultant at the same time too.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably a therapist at times.
Yeah, and you know, I think in 1 month we did, I think, a little over 60 of these informational webinars across the country. So it completely changed the way that we were communicating with people, and then also what we were communicating about. I think that just sharing information, so like oftentimes you might feel like you're on a little lonely island as an agency or a media group. You just don't know how it's impacting other people. We even shared information about, you know, what's going on with staffing levels locally. Did you have to cut? Did you have to stipend? You know, what's happening? So just sharing as much as we could, since we do have that bird's eye view of so many people all across the country going through the same thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. You mentioned that you saw a couple of categories actually increase. What categories were those?
Yeah, so we saw, you know, it makes sense, a huge surge in governmental dollars when it came to health marketing. We saw tiny little markets that are you know, that might spend, you know, $3,000-$5,000 a month suddenly with $20,000 buys because they need to get out information about the pandemic. We saw an increase in a lot of at-home services, HVAC in-home services. You know, people are in their house, redecorating, that sort of thing. We also saw a really big shift upwards in education. So a lot of universities were suddenly switching to online education, and you had this whole group of people that were graduating that you know, needed different recruitment strategies. So we saw a lot there. And then we saw the normal sort of scale up throughout the year with political, which we're in right now, as well as like the census still had to happen. So we got a lot of census dollars coming in as well.
Great. Now let's shift for a second about the communication internally, because you have a significant staff too. So what was the communication like with the team internally, especially when you see that $1 million coming off the books so quickly?
It was pretty scary, not gonna lie. One of the things that we do, which is kind of similar to a lot of tech companies out there, is we have these big, beautiful offices and fun things for young ad buyers, that, you know, beer in the fridge, and it's sort of like our culture was built off of the sparkly side of technology, I'd say. Because we had an entire team work from home, we had to start doing recruitment from home as we started picking back up again. Learning just internally how to build our culture completely virtually was very different for us. We communicated with them every single week, an internal update. We call it Vici Vitals. And we weren't reactionary. It was super scary to lose that much money off the books right away. But we were just determined to work really hard, even if business was down, to provide as many resources as we can. And we did assure everyone, you know, you have a job, we're not cutting anyone's salary. And we really just worked on our internal culture and keeping everyone's spirits up, because it's scary in advertising when you go through anything like this.
Oh, sure. And then just it sounds like too, you were keeping an eye more on the long game as opposed to the short term as well, knowing that things will start to pick up. So you will have that core team in place as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, since we opened our doors almost 7 years ago, we've just had this momentum. You know, every year we've always billed more than the year before. And that's because our agency partners are billing more every year, and we're providing them those tools. So it's like a win-win. So for the first time, we thought that 2020 might be that, you know, we're not going to grow this year. We might even be lucky, like really lucky, if we even, you know, meet what we did last year, but we just kind of have to do our best and get through what we can, and then just be a resource in any way that you can. I think that agencies, like, especially if you're on this call, if you're a smaller agency, you just have the ability to be flexible in a way that large companies might not be able to do. So being able to give those updates and be flexible, change your training, change your complete, outlook on how you communicate with clients that quickly is part of the resiliency of being a part of a small agency.
Yeah, no, those are great points. Looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently, like in the March, April, sort of May time period?
Yeah, I think that, we were kind of stunned when this all happened, and we didn't get our game plan together for 3 or 4 weeks in, because we didn't know where the bottom was. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. Our problems shifted from, how do we get this next great product out, to can our clients even pay their bills, and how can we work with them on doing that? Because as you know, we buy everything in real time. So, looking back, I would have just done it sooner, but it's one of those situations that, you kind of have to protect yourself and shore up your own employees, their health and safety first, and then, jump into action. So now that I know the plan, and now that I know it works so well, being more of a consultative approach as opposed to just a pure sales approach, and how that business really did bounce back, I just would have probably enacted that a little bit sooner.
That's a great point. But yeah, tough to exactly not knowing where the bottom is and when it's
Yeah. It's a scary time for sure.
hard to navigate. Were there any industries or verticals that surprised you in their resiliency? I mean, some of the ones you mentioned, like education and home improvement, made sense based on what people were doing. But was there anything that surprised you in terms of certain verticals that, like, wow, I didn't expect them to be so strong?
Automotive continues just to forge ahead. We had cancellations all across the board. And we had some auto partners that were not only, forging ahead, but also like doubling down. A lot of the cooperative dollars were in automotive during that time, and we saw an increase in that co-op. Auto, we work with a really big dealer through an ad agency out in California, and they were posting record sales during COVID. They switched to delivering it to people's houses, having one-on-one consultations, and they just continue to be kind of a leader when it comes to digital marketing, especially with the amount of dollars spent. And they didn't really wobble too hard. I think that, the auto industry saw the setback that we had in the early 2000s when the housing market kind of crashed, and they got hurt pretty bad by that. So they've been really resilient throughout, and it still to this day is one of our top categories.
Really? That's very interesting. Right. You wouldn't necessarily think that auto, that doesn't come to mind as the category that is resilient. But
yeah, especially you're not driving to work all the time. But yeah, we saw that it never dropped out of our top 5.
Wow. Or necessarily going to the lot in person, things like that. Like,
yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But you bring up a good point, I think, in terms of the curve that they had a learning experience previously.
Yeah.
So in terms of how to navigate some of that as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So 8 months now, I guess it's like 8 months in almost. So your business as a whole, how is it? So I know that you said you were hoping to rebound, and sounds like that's been the case. You now?
If you would have asked me a couple months ago, just breaking even, which it looked like we were going to do, was going to be the best. But October, this month right now, is historically the best month that my company's ever had, billing wise. And it's not just like a 1 or 2 big accounts that came in or anything like that, or even just political, because it is a political month. We look at the average spend that all of our agency partners have, and we make plans with them to help them grow their spend. And across the board, they've risen 20% in their spend, even like year over year over last year. So I think that by going to their clients and providing them training, and by the way, doing all this for free, right? We're putting all this out there, giving you whatever you need to really get through this. It ended up helping us. And we were worried that this year would not be a growth year for us, but we're holding our record. We're going on year 7 of growth years every year since we opened our doors. So I'm thrilled by that, considering how I felt in April.
Well, it sounds like your consultative approach is really what's buoyed you, and like you said, everything for free, but you really became a true consultant for your clients and helping them navigate. And it sounds like that's what's also been paying off then on the long run too.
Yeah. And the less that you can just present a topic and a strategy, and the more that you can actually just have real conversations and overcome real problems that people are having. I don't know how to update my hours to tell them I'm closed. Why do they have to figure that out on their own just because it's free? Being able to be that resource, and also pointing all of our agencies in the direction of where the money is. So saying, this is who you need to call. This is the census board. Here's the agencies that control the money. Here's how you figure out what's in your area. Here's the co-op dollars available in your area. Here's who's doing 100% reimbursement. Pointing also our agencies in the right direction so that they can then make those big sales and have these record years in a downturn was part of the strategy, because we do see it from a bird's eye view. We learned from one market and we just kept replicating across all the other markets and getting all of our clients really big wins.
Such a great point, and just truly guiding them to and giving them the directions that sometimes were needed. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Moving forward, what do you think, do you see, or do you think that there are certain parts of the business as a whole that are forever changed, that as a result of this, good or bad, will be different?
I think everyone got more casual in their dress because we're not meeting with a lot of clients anymore. No, I think that for us, working on internally virtual culture is going to be important for us, not necessarily having shiny things for our staff and employees, and learning how to team build away from each other and communicate effectively is going to be important. And then, one thing that I learned, and, for agencies and small businesses is honestly just how resilient everyone can be. I think that people that are in digital marketing are just naturally curious. They're lifelong learners. They want to know what the next best thing is. And by the very nature of the people on this call that want to stay abreast of what's happening with the iOS 14 update. I mean, I've been looking at that weekly too. Being able to effectively communicate your lifelong learning and always being curious about what's out there, I think that is a staple that the people that are used to doing that, they're really getting a lot of payoff right now because they were able to react appropriately, as opposed to just, well, I have this one thing that I sell and no one's buying it, so what do I do now, right? So just being able to have that for people, I think, is just going to be the most important from an agency perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. What have you learned about your team over this time?
We didn't lose anyone, and they've been just such rock stars internally with our team. They're always coming up with like really silly, fun incentives for one another and complimenting each other. And it just makes you feel good that the people that you have kind of supporting the overall operation, we sort of have been doing the right thing. We have a pretty intense internship program. We have a paid internship program, and then we typically hire from that internship program. So you kind of beat out a lot of people to get on the team to begin with. And then once you're on the team, we always make all of the different benefits that they have, really attractive so that you don't want to leave. So we like to think that we had the best in the industry because of that. And they were so resilient throughout this entire thing. Even when they had nothing to buy, they were still like, I might have only 5 campaigns right now, but I'm still going to do all this extra work to support clients, even if they're not spending with us.
No, that's awesome. And comes from great leadership too. What advice would you have like for agencies or SMBs moving forward? I think you touched on this to some degree in terms of being consultative and things too. Anything else that comes to mind that you think just in terms of moving forward?
We have kind of 2 different types of feedback. People can give us feedback directly. They can also give us anonymous feedback. We have an anonymous feedback link, which we look at every single day, just to feel comfortable with giving, you know, us advice and listening to the clients and listening to what's happening out there, having that open dialogue, and then just never stop that learning, that training, never stop being a resource. I think that that's just the absolute key, and what we as agencies can all do for our clients.
No, that's a great point. I was curious too, just a little more granular with some of the things that you do, and just in the digital landscape itself. Were there any types of new strategies that came to the surface, or new types of communication, or things that you started executing for clients that were different as a result of the times that we're going through?
Yeah, so we developed new industry verticals based on what was happening. So we never had a government vertical before. We put out, here's the link, here's the people that you talk to, here's how you figure out the agency that's in your area to get that money. We also never had a specific like kind of COVID type of training when it comes to how are people shifting their time spent. So we saw an increase in OTT and connected TV than just your traditional TV buys on the broadcast side, because we work with traditional broadcasts as well. A lot of the webinars that we do are usually once a week, every Wednesday, on that specific industry vertical. So we started recording these so that if you had to go out to a law firm that next Friday, here's the stats that you need to know about law firms during COVID. You saw a big increase in family law, maybe divorces and maybe things like that. You saw a big increase in bankruptcy. You saw a big increase in people that were starting to look at their estate planning. So instead of talking about, okay, here's what you used to go after with law, being able to make it very, very specific, and then updating those specific things in real time, I think was really helpful, because anytime you walked in, you did a quick training, you got the latest collateral from us, and boom, you were ready to walk in as the expert in law, even if it was the first time you were pitching to a law firm.
And then also too, verticals like that changed how they do business too, right? Like even for law, they were doing more things virtually as well with documents and things, and needed to communicate that too. So while their business model changed, you needed to help communicate that to people at the same time.
Yeah, and DSPs, you know, everyone has their own way of doing things. Like the iOS 14 update is really hurting Facebook's Facebook audience network, as was talked about before. And that used to be a tactic that people could use. It still is until the Q1 update, but things do change very rapidly. And so being able to be that resource to pull in all of these different major DSPs that are out there, and making sure that clients have the best technology with them. You know, that's absolutely crucial, because it's too much for a individual client to keep up with it. So we made it our job to be on the cutting edge of any type of news that went out. Oh my gosh, Google stopped advertising in Washington. You're not allowed to do that anymore. You know, people in Washington need to know that. So really making it local, and really being that sort of that educational factor, so that they can best get that information to their clients.
Sure. No, that makes sense. This is great. I mean, I think one of the great learnings from this too is just the fact that it's not something necessarily, you know, funky or gadgety. It's just about digging in, finding the right strategies, and just being dedicated to those strategies, and also being consultative when it comes to the relationships that you have both internally and externally.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as an agency, your feet are really held to the fire on sometimes cost per click or CPM. And it's kind of like, what have you done for me lately? And if you're just selling the same product that everyone else is selling, you know, there's a million ways to get to the internet through a million different people. You know, what's your competitive edge? And I think that being a resource to that is important, but also just knowing where the money is right now, you know, because it changes. You have to know where the money is going into Q4, into Q1, and how to find it and beat out your competitors from finding that money. And so that's a crucial part of it too.
Right. Well, thank you. If anyone has some questions too for Megan, you can please reach out now too. But Megan, this has been great. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing just, you know, your take, your strategies, your experience along this crazy year.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Let's see if we have any questions, specifically from Megan. One question, I guess, is where is your office located?
Philadelphia. Go Eagles.
Nice to get that get that cheer in.
Yes.
Very cool. I guess we don't have any other specific questions at this time. So, but this will also be available and be sent out as a link to afterwards. So if anyone has questions coming up, we can certainly, be reaching out to anyone whose contact information will be provided as well. But I guess too, we can open it up to just any general questions if people wanted to ask. Otherwise, let's see. So one question asking, where's the money right now? But it sounds like that question is really based on the fact that it's in different areas. I mean, certainly for the short term, it's political, but also auto continues to be education. It sounds like, in healthcare are some of the growing verticals at the moment that continue to be important to focus on as well. Evelyn, was there any other moments? I guess not, or not that I can see. So, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to Mike for his amazing insight as well, which was fantastic. And like I said, this is going to be available and for people to download and to access as well. And any other questions, please feel free to reach out. Yes, is that someone?
Eric, I think Ben raised his hand earlier. I did allow him to talk. I don't know if he's still raising his hand. Ben, I think if you have a question, feel free to use your mic, unmute yourself, and you could speak. He might, I think, just sign off just now. We'll catch him. We'll catch him later. There is one question from Chris.
Yes, Megan, I think this one could be directed to you. I can't afford advertising right now because I can't afford to pay my employees. How is that something that you battle with or overcome in the world of digital? I think part of it could be what you were saying before, just about being consultative, but is there anything else maybe that to share there?
Yeah, so kind of the more specific topics that we talked about was doing informational seminars to really drum up that need. One thing that we do at Vici is all of our media groups, all of our agencies out there, we give them that collateral, or we'll put it on their behalf, and it's white labeled. So no one knows who we are. We're always just kind of behind the scenes. Some other things, I talked about, the sort of the hot retail categories and things like that. Right now, like in December, where we're pointing all of our agencies, are tires, automotive, windows and doors, painting and wall coverings. And then we actually have a list of all the co-op that actually expires at the end of the year, and how much of that is 100% reimbursable. So like if you're running a display campaign on GroundTruth and you provide a report and a screenshot of the fact that ran, you can get that reimbursed for your clients. We're just past the political, so that's just now coming down the curb right now. But start looking at annuals that are coming through. The government annuals, the education annuals, a lot of them already happened back in June and July. So this is looking at all the other traditional media outside of like government and education. Everyone's starting to prep for that right now.
Great points. Thank you. Good. Well, again, thank you to everyone. Megan, thank you so much to you. Really appreciate it. Thank you to Mike and to Rosie and to the GroundTruth team. So be on the lookout. You'll receive a link to this webinar as well. And we look forward to connecting and answering any questions that you have. So have a great day and thank you again.